I call on Congress to do so, and I look forward to working with them in good faith over the next few weeks.
Washington Journal continues.
This is a chance to find out what our two guests have been reading on this Tuesday morning, and to hear from you. We'll put the phone numbers on the screen, and we'll introduce Congressman Ron Paul, Republican from Texas, now in your first term, but you previously served how many terms?
4 terms before, back in the 70s.
And Libertarian Party presidential candidate in what year?
88.
And Senator Patty Murray, who is in her first term, and as we mentioned just a moment ago, already running for re-election. 6 years goes by quickly.
It goes by way too fast.
What are you reading today?
Well, I was caught by the New York Times editorial today, lead editorial, closing in on campaign reform. Campaign finance reform is something my constituents are always asking me, when is this going to pass? How can we make this happen? And the House now has a petition, a discharge petition with 201 signatures on it, 18 more signatures, and that measure will go to the floor in the House. And so what I can now respond to my constituents, call your House members, tell them to sign the discharge petition and get this to the floor of the House. It will make a difference.
There's an editorial basically taking the same take in USA Today, but what the New York Times did is for the holdouts in the New York City area, they have put the phone numbers of their representatives, which include Michael Forbes, Benjamin Gilman, Sue Kelly, Rick Lazio, Jack Quinn, Bob Franks of New Jersey, and others.
Right. Well, this is something positive people can do, is call their congressional members and ask them to sign.
Why do we need campaign finance reform?
Well, I think all of us who have come into office in this decade feel very strongly that the amount of money that is in campaigns right now really precludes good people from running for office because of the time and the energy and the commitment that it takes to go out and raise the money. And I think that if we can begin to put some focus on how we can make sure that a lot of people can run without having to face those overwhelming amounts of money, have accountability, I think it will make a difference in the way we can operate here in the nation's capital.
Congressman Ron Paul, can you explain, we hear the term discharge petition. Why do you need this to get the bill on the floor of the House?
Well, I guess because the leadership doesn't want it on the floor of the House. That would be the best reason. But I, too, agree. A lot of people in this country want campaign reform. I just don't happen to agree with the proposals that are out there, even the proposals that might come to the floor. We have a major problem, but the problem isn't the fact that people have the freedom to spend their money the way they want, which is what campaign spending is all about. The courts have ruled that we're allowed to spend our money the way we want, individuals. It just gets messy when you start talking about giving it to a candidate. But if we have freedom to use our money as we see fit. Our problem is we have $100 million a month being spent to tell us to influence our vote. And that's where the problem is. But it isn't so much that they have this right to come and influence us, because we have to protect that right. It's the fact that government is so big and so influential and has so much power over the economy and everything that we do in our lives. That's where the problem is. So no matter what you do with reforms, as long as government is big and so intrusive, there's going to be ways they're going to try to buy influence.
You're both running for re-election this year. How much are you going to spend?
I'll probably spend close to $1 million, but I see this as good in that I can raise the money. It's a sign that people support me. I get my average donation is $50. I would take PAC money, but they don't give it to me because they consider it a bad investment because they don't influence my vote any. But I raise the money, but that's a vote of support, and people should be allowed. But people should be allowed to give me $2,000 if they want. Why should? And you know, where the real abuse, since you mentioned I was in the Libertarian Party for a while, the real abuse here is the fact that anybody that wants to compete with Republicans and Democrats have no chance at all, because they cannot raise the money as easily. The Republicans and Democrats put this tremendous burden on anybody who wants to compete. What we need is competition in the political system. They put such a burden for signatures. We spend more money in third parties trying to get signatures to get on the ballot, and then they're not permitted in the debates. I have reforms in these two areas I think are very, very positive But ultimately, though, you're going to have problems as long as this government is so big and has so much power over our lives and over the economy.
We're going to get to calls in just a moment. Senator Murray, how much will you spend for your re-election this year?
We'll probably have to spend close to $5 million, and the reason is that that so many people are going into independent expenditures today. You don't just run against an opponent; you run against unknown sources who are putting ads on the air and telling people different things, and you don't even hardly control your race anymore. That's why I think campaign finance reform is so important. I think voters have a right to know who's contributing to their campaign, where the money's coming from, because that will tell them how their elected official is going to act once they get into office.
How much did you spend 6 years ago?
I spent $1.3 million 6 years ago.
Ron Paul, what else are you reading today?
I found this one article on the front page of the Post, Farming Locally, Thinking Globally. I think it's an interesting article because there's a criticism labeled toward those individuals of the Republican Party that the individual calls isolationists. But I think the reason why this attracted my attention is because this is a tricky terminology. The individual here who are criticizing those who are so-called isolationists are those who won't vote for IMF bailouts. You know, saying that if you don't vote to take money from taxpayers to subsidize exports through the IMF and the World Bank and through organizations like the World Trade Organization, through organizations like the management of NAFTA, if you don't subsidize this and the Export-Import Bank, you're an isolationist and you're against free trade. I'm a free trader, but I am not for subsidized trade. And this is why there's a trick on words. They call anybody who's opposed to managed trade, which is all what's going on here through GATT and these other things. These are managed trades and they're subsidized trade, and they claim this is free trade. This has nothing to do with free trade. Many of these individuals who are critical of those of us who will advocate for real free trade aren't the ones who are championing the cause of, say, why don't we at least trade with Cuba? Why don't we sell some food products to Cuba? We'd be better off arguing for selling food to Cuba than we would be arguing for the IMF bailout, because the IMF bailout is actually hurting farmers because you have to tax farmers to pay for this. Same way I'd like to see more open trade with countries like with Iran, Iraq, instead of threatening war with them all the time.
Congressman Ron Paul represents the 14th District in Texas, was born in Pittsburgh, and trained as an OBGYN. Do you still deliver babies?
Not currently, but I did up to about a year ago when I came back.
And Patty Murray is a graduate of Washington State University in her first term in the U.S. Senate, a former teacher and former state senator. When you started out as a preschool teacher, did you ever think you'd be in the U.S. Senate?
Oh, absolutely not. I never thought that I would end up here, but I think what really motivated me to run back in 1992 is what keeps me here now, is that I believe I bring a real down-to-earth perspective to a lot of what we're doing. I am like a lot of families across this country, raising 2 children, going to work every day, trying to make sure my kids can get to college and that we have good jobs in my state, trying to make sure that health care is there for my parents and others' parents who are elderly. And I know what those struggles are. I know what it's like to be a preschool teacher, to worry about your paycheck, to worry about going to school and daycare and our public education system, which is absolutely critical to many families.
As you know, your opponents are going to say whether or not you've been effective as a senator. What do you say to them?
Absolutely. I have been here in the nation's capital speaking out for issues that affect everyday families. You know, I actually, my next article I wanted to talk about was in the Washington Post today, saying education initiatives give parties a plank for November races. When I came here in 1992, one of the things I said to my friends was, I want to go back there because people in the nation's capital aren't talking about real issues that affect my families. I have fought very hard over the last 5 years to bring education to the forefront of discussion in this nation. Finally, we are there. Our Senate today is talking about education. We're talking about what is real to everyday people, whether or not their kids are going to get the kind of education they need to get out and get a job one day.
So has Patty Murray made a difference?
Absolutely.
We got a call from Cookeville, Tennessee on our independent line. Good morning.
Thank you very much. A quick comment, then a question for Congressman Paul. Congressman, first of all, let me say that I think you're a great American. I agree with you on your all of your reforms, including the monetary reforms. I agree with you about the trade agreements, especially that sanctions should be lifted, and we should open up countries like Iraq, Iran, Libya, and what have you. I also agree with you very much on your tax reforms. I'm highly opposed to the Internal Revenue Service and its abuse of power. But now to my question. I ran as an independent years ago, and I wonder, and it was very difficult. I spent less than $300. I got 4% of the vote, which I thought was pretty good since my Democratic opponent spent over $650,000, and only 33% turnout. But are you planning to introduce, or is anyone planning to introduce any legislation to help independent candidates get more publicity and have a fair chance to get elected to office? I'll hang up and listen to your answer. Thank you so much.
Okay, I have two pieces of legislation. The one would encourage the third party or independent candidates by lowering the number of signatures. You are being excluded because the major parties put such a difficult task before you by getting huge number of signatures. The other thing I've done is introduce legislation for the presidential level. If a presidential candidate takes taxpayers' money, they have to take it under the condition that anybody else who qualifies to get on enough states to win the presidential election would be included in the debates, because so often individuals are excluded from the debates and they really should be on there. And the debates generally are very boring. And I think it would be interesting to get libertarians and socialists and who all on these debates if they qualify to get on. But as far as getting more publicity, I would be very cautious about that. I would never ask the taxpayers to subsidize a campaign. That is very, very dangerous. So I would never want to subsidize as much as I would want to help the competition. I wouldn't want to do it through subsidies. I would want to do it by removing the onerous laws that prohibit these candidates to compete.
Another call from Tennessee. Hello, Rock. Good morning on our Republican line. Hello, you're on the air. Good morning.
I'm here.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry, I had to turn the TV down. I'm from Goer's Liberal state of Tennessee, and he just sit right down here for the tornado in Nashville. And I felt so sorry for those people in Alabama the week before. And, you know, he didn't show any real concern about that. But my comment or question on the tobacco paying tax, why should we all pay for the president's allergy? Was his mother a smoker, or I don't know, what is this thing with this smoke?
Senator Murray?
Well, the tobacco settlement is a very important issue that we are addressing here in the Senate and House. We know now that the tobacco companies for years have targeted young children to get them to start smoking, because they know that if they can get somebody to start smoking at 14, they're going to be buying their product for the next 40, 50, or 60 years. And as a result of using that product, we have to spend a tremendous amount of money on health care for people with lung cancer and other serious diseases who got that as a result of smoking. The tobacco settlement really goes after the tobacco companies in a very hard way to say, you are not going to sell to our children anymore. Now, the tobacco companies have said they've walked away from the table, but I still think Congress has a responsibility to go right back after them and say, you're not going to advertise and target our young children. You are not going to get away with saying we're just not going to participate. We have to find out what will keep our children from stopping smoking, and we've got to stop the advertising that's targeted at them.
Do either of you take money from the tobacco lobby?
I don't believe I've gotten any, but I would, because it won't influence me any. I mean, I'm very critical of the tobacco industry, but not for the same reasons. I think the tobacco industries were real jerks because they sold out when they took the subsidies, and they get protectionism. So they were part of the government all these years. Then we go and we give free medical care. We tax the people who don't smoke. Everybody knows smoking is dangerous. They've known this for hundreds of years. This is nothing new. So what do we do as a nation? We subsidize an industry that's producing a product which is nearly, as bad as it is, it's not nearly as dangerous as most people think. 90% of the people who smoke don't get serious illnesses. But if this is this collective idea that everybody's responsible for everybody else, Nobody has a responsibility for taking it upon themselves. If they smoke, it's danger. So,
Where do
of
you come
course,
up
the
with the
government's
figure?
going to pay for the medical care. Why should the government pay for the medical care? Why should people who don't smoke pay for the care of the people who do smoke?
Where do you come up with the figure 90%?
Well, this is from the, I can't give you the journal, but this is the figure that pulmonary surgeons will give you. About 10%, but 10% is horrible. When you think about it, you might have a 200% greater chance of having lung cancer if you smoke. So when you say it that way, it's horrible. But it's just not like everybody who smokes. So people have a right to smoke. Tobacco companies have a right to sell their tobacco, and people have the right to and their obligation to assume their responsibility for their own acts, but not to come begging to the government.
Well, tobacco companies do not have a right to sell to our children, specifically to get them started at an early
Okay,
age.
fine. I would agree with that, as they don't have the right to sell drugs to children. But when did the federal government get involved, and where does the authority come from the federal government to teach kids good habits? That's what you're saying. Where does the First Amendment tell you that you can tell companies how they should advertise? That should be a local matter. I mean,
Do you take money from the tobacco lobby?
Not to the best of my knowledge, I haven't. And actually, when I was running for the state senate back in 1988, I got a check from a tobacco company. I sent it back. They sent it back to me, and I figured if they were going to keep sending it to me, I'd use it. So I deposited it in my campaign account and wrote a like amount to the American Heart and Lung Association.
You had a fundraiser with President Clinton, I think, a couple weeks ago.
Oh, it was back in November.
My question is, under the proposal that campaign finance reform proponents are calling for, would those kinds of events be allowed under the proposed changes?
Under the campaign finance reform that went through the Senate, hopefully we can get through the House. It would mean that you would have to limit the amount of PAC money and have a majority of your money come from within your state, and voluntary limits as to how much you would raise. So absolutely, you could have a fundraiser like that.
Isn't this a limitation on people's freedom? If the courts have already ruled that if you're wealthy, you can spend your money the way you want,
right.
even in politics.
I agree with you. I think one of the real drawbacks, there's no campaign finance reform plan that is perfect out there, absolutely not. But I think we do have to get to a point where we're saying we are spending way too much money, and the average person doesn't feel like their participation is getting them anywhere if they write you a $10 or $15 or $20 check.
Why don't we talk about the incentive?
And frankly, one of the most important things is full accountability, so people know where you're getting your money.
I agree. You should have it, but why not talk about the incentive, the reason for people to come up here and bring $100 million a month? It's because they're going to get something for it. If you don't remove that incentive, they're always going to come.
I'm not sure what you mean by $100 million
$100 million a month is being spent by the lobbyists. That's how much they spend to influence our votes. I mean, it's horrible, so I agree with you that it's a serious problem. But you're saying come down upon the people and say, well, we're going to limit the way you can spend your own money, infringe on their freedom, rather than saying the problem is us. It's our government. It's our size of our government. We have so much for sale. And this is the problem. So as long as we can influence, say, these farmers who want IMF bailouts to protect the farmers, or the Export-Import Bank to export our products, they're going to come and lobby.
I'll have to respond to you that, you know, I came here knowing what I believed in. I know what I came here believing that was my job to represent my constituents all the way across the country in Washington State. I'm not bought or influenced by anybody who walks into my office. I certainly believe there's a lot of people who bring information to us that's important for us to hear, so we can make sure that the policies we set and the votes that we take are educated votes. But we don't have to be influenced by anybody we don't want to be influenced by.
We're joined here on the table with Senator Patty Murray of Washington and Congressman Ron Paul, who represents cities including Victoria, San Marcos, and West Columbia, Texas, as we get a call from Shelburne, Vermont. Good morning on our Democratic line.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the campaign finance reform. As Senator Murray said, the real problem in campaigning is the soft money. And a former agricultural commissioner from the state of Texas, Mr. Paul's state, and the state in which I was raised, Jim Hightower, made the most logical recommendation that I have ever heard. And that is to pass a constitutional amendment which declares that a corporation and any other legally constituted organization is not a person. Consequently, they do not enjoy the free speech rights that were conferred upon us as individuals by the Constitution, and surely the framers meant free speech to apply to individuals. In the early days of this country, the activities of corporations were severely restricted by law and consequently were considered to be constitutional. If we declared corporations and organizations, these interest group organizations, not to be persons, then we could control their activities and not have the kind of distorted issue advocacy that we see in campaigns which skirt the law and are clearly meant to tear down one candidate or support another candidate.
Thanks, caller. Senator Murray?
Well, the caller points out a real critical problem, and that is that the courts have declared that money is equal to free speech. So it allows people to give as much money as they want to, unencumbered, to independent expenditures, which can be a group of 4 people who decide they want to pool $100,000 apiece together and put an ad up on the television saying, call Senator Patty Murray and tell her, whatever. And no one ever knows where that money came from, who these people are, and what groups that they are representing. And that has been upheld by the Constitution. Well, so it is a challenge in campaign finance reform. The same as if as anybody who's a millionaire can put in their own money to whatever amount they want to in their campaign, making it virtually impossible for somebody like me to compete against them. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't move forward on campaign finance reform. That means that we should move forward on campaign finance reform. The measure that should go before the House will ban soft money. That will begin to make the steps in the right direction. And then let's see where we go over the next 2 to 4 years and what progress we can
Let's
make.
grab this call and we'll come back to you. Rochester, New York. Good morning.
Hi, thank you, C-SPAN. Ron, you said that the federal government isn't involved in affecting the behavior of children, but you're wrong.
I didn't hear what you said.
You said that the federal government isn't involved in the moral direction of children.
I said that if you deal with it, it should be at a local government level.
Well, what about federal crime? Our entire legal system is based on the idea of deterring someone from committing a crime by posing a law before them that will put them in jail if they commit the act.
Well, most of that's all unconstitutional. There are only 3 federal crimes in the Constitution listed. So we have drifted a long time from the original intent and the purpose of our Constitution. So yes, there are a lot of federal crimes. There are thousands, and every regulation is essentially a federal law. And I disagree with those. And I would say that if you want to deal with those kind of problems, whether it's smoking or drinking for children, it should be done in our home states. I mean, that's the way the Constitution clearly reads.
Did you want to follow up, caller?
Yeah. My main issue is campaign finance reform. I think that you're right around about opening it up to more candidates.
Right.
And one of the proposals that I have is to mandate for, say, House of Representative or senatorial elections that there be at least 3 debates, one like a complete open primary beyond just Democratic and Republican candidates, completely open, and then a second where, say, only you have a series of votes where you decide who did best in these debates. And then and alongside the debates, also mandate that all candidates put forward for publication in their newspaper, and the newspapers in their district, proposals on different aspects of the federal government. How do they feel about defense? How do they feel about education? How do they feel about health care?
Thanks, caller. Congressman Paul?
I think all those goals are laudable. I would be cautious and would have to think it through completely because I don't like the word mandate from the federal level. We certainly have some authority over the federal elections of the senators and the congressmen. I wouldn't like to use the federal funds, but anything that we could do to work in that direction of openness and more discussion and more competition, I think the better. I think those are good suggestions.
From the Los Angeles Times, Young America's Foundation is purchasing the Reagan Ranch. It went on the market in 1996 for nearly $6 million. It is the 688-acre mountaintop property in California where the president spent about 345 days in his presidency. This is how the story looks this morning in USA Today by Jessica Lee. The purchase price has not been disclosed. Any reaction?
To each his own. If they want it, buy it to market value. I'm not too to...
Have either of you heard of Young America's Foundation? It's a conservative group based in Herndon, Virginia.
I have not heard of it.
And they will use it as a retreat location. What else are you reading from the paper, Senator Murray?
Well, my eye caught in the Washington Times this morning a really great story about reading together. It's a mother-daughter book club that mothers and daughters get together on Sunday afternoon and read books, talk about them. And what really caught my eye about this is the importance of literacy, the importance of young people learning to read, and the importance of families working together. And it really highlighted it in a positive way, and I was just impressed by that.
What else are you reading, Congressman?
Well, the top story in the Washington Post is Iraq's cowed Shiites lose zeal for rebellion. That's the very top headline. I've been very interested in and have spoken out a good bit about the Iraqi situation. I think we're still in a very dangerous situation there. I was strongly opposed to the bombing Iraq, and I think this is also confirmation of a failed policy that we follow, because after the Persian Gulf War, our government went and encouraged the Shiites and also the people in the north to rebel, and then we didn't do anything about it, so they were left stranded, and many of them were killed. Something like a modern-day Bay of Pigs, where they were expecting help but didn't get it. But yesterday's paper even reported something that I think is another consequence of our failed policy, and that is what we're doing in the Middle East is we are doing a very good job in bringing the radical fundamentalist Muslim elements together. The Iraqis and the Iranians are closer together than they probably have been in hundreds of years because of our threat with our bombs and our threat of war. So they are releasing prisoners. I think yesterday they sat down and had peace negotiations. Very, very important event occurring in the Middle East. The Muslim fundamentalists are getting stronger than ever. It doesn't serve our cause, and I think the more we threaten, the more we intimidate, the more we want to bomb people, the more we're leading into another fiasco like Vietnam. We trade with Vietnam now. That's a much better way than trying to impose our will on Vietnam by going over there and dropping bombs. So I would say that this just points out again that we have a very, very poor foreign policy in the Middle East.
Fayetteville, North Carolina, on our Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning. I'll tell you how phony our president is on the smoking issue. If you can pull up where he was in Carlton, Kentucky, and he was sitting there in the warehouse talking to the tobacco people, and the smoke was just rolling up from out from under the table where he was holding his cigar underneath the table. And it was very obvious on TV. And it doesn't seem to me like that you want to punish the people who smoke by raising the prices, not to the tobacco companies. The tobacco companies are not going to pay this $5 a pack. I am, and I think I'm very bitter about it. Thank you.
I agree. He ought to be. Why should he be taxed? It's the most regressive tax. You're picking on people who have an addiction. They're addicted to this drug, and you know, the other thing on the economics of this, it's totally foolish. This idea of a $1.50 or $2 tax on there in order for us to have a windfall up here. We're up here arguing now over how we're going to spend $500 billion windfield on this tobacco. So I think that the whole thing is absolutely foolish on what we're doing. The responsibility falls on the individual. But when the economics come into effect, you put on the tax and you drive the stuff into the underground economy. Canada put a huge tax on there. They didn't get any more revenues. So even this $500 billion windfall profit tax that they're going to have isn't going to come about, because people will either slow up on the use of cigarettes, maybe, or they will go to the underground economy and they'll buy it, or our tobacco companies will go overseas and sell their tobacco or something else. But we will not collect it once you price the cigarettes out of the market.
A viewer in Pennsylvania says, why is this administration not putting the same effort toward curtailing drug use among teenagers as it is toward stopping them from smoking? When was the last time you heard from a teenager overdosing on a cigarette? And another view from a viewer in Long Island who says, a question for callers who smoke: how would you feel if the FDA just ordered cigarette companies to remove all nicotine from cigarette tobacco? Question to all Ken Starr lovers: why haven't the CEOs of cigarette companies who lied under oath to Congress been indicted for perjury and for suborning perjury?
Well, first of all, let me say the increase on tobacco products, the $1.50 a pack or $1.10 a pack, which I believe is what Senator McCain's bill does, is done not for a windfall profit. It is done to deter young kids from purchasing cigarettes. And studies have shown that if you do increase the price of a pack of cigarettes, that it does stop young kids from smoking. And I think that's an important goal. Again, why? Because those kids, after smoking 10, 15, 20, 30 years, end up costing us as taxpayers because they end up in hospitals, on Medicare, on Medicaid, and we pay their doctor bills, not even to talk about the emotional toll that it takes on their families. And I have talked to people who've lost relatives who have died of lung cancer. It is a horrendous disease. It is a horrible thing, and we should do everything we can to encourage children not to. But the other thing is we need to pay for the research to find out why kids start smoking so that we can counter that and find ways to make them
Senator,
not start.
If that would work, none of the kids would be smoking marijuana. I mean, they started to regulate marijuana in 1937 by putting a huge tax on it. They drove it in the other kind of economy. Kids can probably buy marijuana easier than they can buy cigarettes. So that authoritarian approach doesn't work. You're not going to discourage kids from smoking.
But we can pay for research at NIH and other places to find out what it is. We, all of us. It will pay us in the end to help kids not start smoking. We are paying. We're paying for it now. We're paying for it when they end up in our hospitals and when they're seriously ill.
Why should I pay for sick people who smoke and do dumb things? If you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, should I pay for it? No, I mean, why should I pay for people who do dumb things?
Well, certainly,
I don't want to do these dumb things. I don't smoke.
If there was a way to do the healthcare system to make people personally responsible for the choices they made in their life, I think that would be great. But it would be very difficult to do.
Take away the incentive that will take care of you, no matter how many dumb things you do, whether you smoke or drink, or if you ruin your liver, we'll give you a liver transplant. We'll do anything you want, no matter what your habits are like. People are going to do it. They will not be responsible for themselves.
But if you go back to a 14-year-old child who doesn't have the adult responsibility of making decisions yet, and they are targeted day after day after day after day by cigarette companies saying this is a great thing to do, this is cool to do, you know, those kids make those decisions based on that. We want to stop that advertising. We want to stop that targeting in our young children.
Virginia Beach, Virginia. Let's grab a call. Good morning. I suspect that we'll come back to this, so go ahead, please.
Okay, I want to answer something that the Republican from Texas said a few minutes ago. He said that smoking only person that involved in smoking is the person that smokes. In other words, his smoking shouldn't bother me. I'm a truck driver, and I had a friend, a very close friend of mine, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, as a truck driver. Never smoked a day in his life. He was a driver for a moving company who would probably go from the East Coast to the West Coast, where it's two drivers to a truck. During the time, he was probably sleeping in the sleeper or something. This guy that was driving would be smoking. He went to get his physical. The doctor told him, hey, you got to leave them cigarettes alone. He said, hey, I don't smoke. You know, he never smoked a day in his life. He never wanted to smoke. Doctor said, you got to put the cigarette. He said, you sure you never smoked? He said, I never smoked. And the guy died about less than a year ago.
From cancer?
From lung cancer. Never smoked a day in his life.
And your point is the other person in the truck smoked?
His smoke, he was laying back there.
Oh, okay, now this may be the cause, it may not be the cause. But if it is a problem, you don't have to come to the federal government. You go to the owner of the company, the people that you work, and say, I want better working conditions. This is a private property rights. Nobody has the right to smoke any place they want. Because if I own a restaurant, and if I want to have a restaurant where I don't want people smoking, I tell them not to smoke. That's my prerogative. But I don't need a federal government to tell people what they can do.
Go ahead, caller. I'm sorry.
Two men riding together in a truck. One is back there sleeping. He can't control what this other man is doing. And you know, the doctor said that he smoked. The doctor did not believe that he didn't smoke.
Well, everybody who has cancer does not necessarily get it from smoke. There are other reasons you have cancer. But I'm not saying that this is not a possibility. It may be, but I don't think you need the federal government to solve that problem. You don't need to attack the right of all people's freedom to smoke and for a tobacco company to sell tobacco in order to solve that problem. That problem can be solved in a much different manner. Conditions should be safe for workers.
Well, let me give you another example. He gave you one of a workplace situation where an employee got secondhand smoke. I was with a group of people yesterday talking about this issue in Seattle, Washington, and one of the problems that was pointed out to me is daycare centers where the daycare provider smokes and the children are subject to secondhand smoke. You may not even know that as a parent when you drop your child off unless they come home and smell like that. And people are subjected to that. You know, we need to take a look at that and say, what is our responsibility and what is our obligation and what right do people have, what consumer rights do people have in those situations?
Let me put the big issue on the table because you've been both going back and forth on different aspects of the tobacco industry. Where do you view the role of the federal government? What are its responsibilities? And then I'll ask you the same question.
Well, I certainly think that the federal government has a right and a responsibility to make sure that tobacco companies do not target our young children with advertisements and other T-shirts and whatever they use to get them to start smoking.
But even beyond the tobacco
We have a right
issue,
to protect our children.
generally, what role does the government have?
The federal government, all governments, are a way for us as a community, neighbor to neighbor, family to family, people to people across the country, to join together to put policies forward that help us as a nation move forward.
Ron Paul?
Okay, the question is not so much are some of these problems out there, it's whether the federal government has this authority to do it. And I say there is no way that they have any authority to do it. If they do, they might as well start on the McDonald's. Because do you think McDonald's advertise to kids? Think about what if I can prove to you that starting kids off on McDonald's and hamburgers is 100 times worse than smoking.
Well,
therefore, you have to go after McDonald's.
That, I'd go with you, but we know that tobacco kills.
But we do know that high cholesterol diets can be detrimental to people that have heart problems and can develop heart trouble. So it's there. So you have to deal with the principle. You can't just say, well, it works here. You have to deal with the principle. If you can attack the tobacco companies, you have the authority to attack anybody. I mean, what about high-speed automobiles? You're always advertising young kids like high-speed automobiles. So go after the automobile companies. Go after McDonald's. Go after everybody.
We do have rules and regulations in this country already today to protect children. You can't make a toy and sell it to kids under 3 if it's something that they can easily swallow.
Well, I'm saying that there's no reason why the federal government should be involved. There's no authority. If you're going to have some of these rules,
then
just a
who's
second.
gonna do it?
You can do it with the state, but then again, the one suggestion I would like to make is whatever happened to this old-fashioned American idea of parental responsibility, which we have zero of because the nanny state has taken over and the parents don't take responsibility. They figure the government will protect us. They'll take care of the kids. They'll teach them all their habits. They'll teach them what to eat, what to smoke, what to do. I mean, kids should be taught what is hot and you don't touch fire. So they should be taught about cigarettes and they should be taught about eating habits, not this gigantic nanny state up here in Washington. That's what the American people are so frustrated about.
A couple of faxes and emails from Bill Robertson, who says the logic of stick it to the tobacco company program can be applied to fatty foods, alcohol, computer games, or any other legal activity that causes disease and leads to medical or other costs. Please protect us from the power of the federal government, not Joe Camel. Another view from Henry Casper says, good morning, the tobacco problem is just a cover-up on Congress's inability to do something about drugs. And a view from Michael, who says this for Patty Murray, kids today are spending $17 for compact discs and $150 for Nike shoes. Do you really think that a $1.50 or $2 increase is going to deter them? Please wake up and join the real world. Comment on any of these.
Well, actually, studies have shown that if you increase the price of cigarettes, it does deter children from smoking. Does it completely stop them? Absolutely not. And that is, again, why we need to do some research to find out what does stop. And we need to tell the cigarette companies that they can't target our children with their advertising.
And from Painesville, Ohio, good morning. My question for both guests, why aren't third parties allowed in the primaries? This seems unfair in our voting process.
Third parties are allowed in the primary, but it's so hard to get in because the burden of collecting signatures is so great because Republicans and Democrats don't like the competition. because policies really don't change a whole lot up here. You know, the policy of government intervention in the economy, intervention in our personal lives and habits, as well as intervention overseas, is endorsed basically by most Republicans and most Democrats. So policies never change. So they don't really want the competition. So they put the burden on the individual who's trying to get on the ballot so tough that you spend all your time and money and energy getting on, and then they exclude you from the debates. So I have the proposals made that would correct this. I think this would go a long way to reform. Introduce the old-fashioned notion of competition, even in politics.
Texas Congressman Ron Paul and Washington Senator Patty Murray are with us on this Tuesday morning. We'll have each of you select another story from the morning papers as we get a call from Sylvania, Ohio on our independent line. Good morning.
Hi. Mr. Paul, I think this is just wonderful that you are on C-SPAN. You're one of the few people that are coming out and talking about the third-party effort and trying to make it fair. I was one of the people out collecting signatures for the Reform Party in both '92 and in other elections for not only state and local, but also national. The rules changed state by state.
Right.
We could not get... Everything that we did was just incredible to try to get done. I wanted to make a comment also about Miss Murray. I think your heart's in the right place as far as the tobacco, but we cannot make all of these rules and laws that we cannot back up. There is absolutely no way. You can't go into someone's home. The parents have to take care of the kids. We've already got laws on the books for tobacco. And if you want to come up to my part of the area, come up on a boat on Lake Erie and watch all of the tobacco that's going across the lake to Canada, where tobacco, now they've got packs of cigarettes up to $5, and there's a huge underground. You can't control these types of things.
Thanks, caller.
I agree with you. Parents have responsibilities that they have to take. There's no doubt about it. But what do you do as a parent when you drop your child off at a daycare center or somewhere else and you can't control that? You don't know going in whether the daycare operator or someone who's employed there is going to smoke around your child. You know, there's sometimes that there is... You may not know that, and I think consumers have a right to know, and that's where we have an obligation to take a look at that and say, is there something we can do to provide better information?
Troy, Michigan, good morning.
Good morning. My question is, I agree regarding the role of government. I think it should be limited. Government is involved too much in our lives. But my question is, if we were to get government out of our lives, what would be the role of Congress? What role would you have?
Senator Murray, we'll start with you. And then
I think Ron Paul has to answer that, since he's the one that's going that direction. You don't want to put us out of business, do you? Well, I'll tell you why. I think that we have a fabulous transportation system. It needs some changes. We're working on that. I think we have a fantastic public education system that was really put into this country to make sure that every child, no matter who they are, where they come from, how much money they have, gets a good education. We need that in this country. We certainly, as a country, have to deal in an international world, whether it's my farmers in my state who want to sell their wheat overseas, or whether it's a company making a small product that wants to sell it someplace. And together, working together, all of us, in a democracy, we can have a very strong country. There are countries without governments. I mean, look at Bosnia, or, you know, look at Rwanda. Do we want to go there? I don't think so. I think we want to say, how can we collectively work, argue, debate, challenge, vote, but let's make sure that we're working together as a country.
The one thing the caller does not have to worry about is that Congress is going to go out of business in the near future. Unfortunately, they're going to be too much involved in transportation, education, and medicine, all the things that
But how do you make that happen without us working together?
Really under the Constitution. You take transportation, for instance. Even in the 1950s, when they started the interstate highway system, they even, and that short a time ago, they felt like it had to justify it by the Constitution. They said, how are we going to do this? We're not allowed to do it. Oh, we'll do it for national defense purposes. There's no authority to run this educational system or the medical system. What would the Congress do under these circumstances? We would take an 80% cut in pay. We'd come up here 3 months a year, and we would have academic discussions on how we can improve the freedom of this country and turn government back to the states. and we would still be allowed to be citizens politicians. You could go home and teach most of the year, and you could come up here 3 months of the year. That would be the proper size government, not to be the nanny state telling people who to smoke and what to eat and all these regulations, running the highway system, destroying our educational system, at the same time ruining medicine. I mean, we don't need any more government like that. We've had enough of that government.
Back to the papers. Anything else catch your eye this morning? Either of you?
Well, I certainly want to go back to the Washington Post article on the education initiative. The Senate today is going to be talking about education at the national level. I think that people across this country want us to have a strong public education system. And there are great, exciting things going on in many of our schools. I visit schools all the time in my home state. My daughter's a senior in high school. Boy, there's great projects. Technology, the wave of the future. We are beginning to get computers into schools, and there's things we can do to improve our public education system. We need to train our teachers with the skills that they need. We need to make sure that our kids have access to quality schools where they can plug computers in, where they're safe. And there's some really great things going on. And finally, here in the nation's capital, we're talking about what we can do to make sure that we give a good public education.
The Los Angeles Times editorial says public schools are in trouble, and they point out that Republicans would rather offer a small monetary reward to every parent who saves for educational expenses, including tuition for non-public elementary or high schools. The White House opposes this because the modest tax break would allow the use of federal dollars to subsidize private and parochial schools. On this issue, the president is right. And the headline of the editorial is, "Don't drain public schools."
Well, I think this points out where they're coming from. The other side is that they don't want to encourage a private initiative. I would give every parent a $3,000 tax credit for every child in order to get privacy back into it. But I have one particular bill that I think makes this point very clearly. When kids try to earn their own money to go to college by selling animals at the livestock show, we tax them. Poor innocent kids, you know, they're not even allowed to vote, and here the Congress is picking on them. They want to take care of themselves. Instead, we want to give them student loans that they don't repay. So I would say turn responsibility back. Why turn this educational system over to the managers of the post office? I mean, it just isn't very good.
You know, I don't know where you're coming from on that, but I can tell you this.
Well, it's the federal government.
The initiative that's in front of the U.S. Senate today will allow people to put away money in an IRA and use the interest for their child's education, public or private. The president is opposed to that, and I'm opposed to that. And I'll tell you why. Having been out and been a school board member, been a teacher, I can tell you that when you put public money into a private schools will be held accountable to the taxpayers, just as public schools are right now. Most private schools do not want that. And separate from that, we will rob from the public education system money that really could go in good things. We're going down a narrow road right now if we say that the only way to save public education is by sending kids to private schools. We have a responsibility in this country to make sure that public education works, and there's things we can do to make that happen. I hope the debate in the Senate today brings that out.
And the Senate will get underway in about 5 minutes. We have about 2 minutes left, so we'll get a call, and I have a fax for both of you. Valparaiso, Indiana, good morning on our Democratic line.
Good morning, and thank you for taking my call. Quick comment on the role of the federal government. I think the federal government should protect the people from our corporate overlords and their pawns in the state and local governments, because there's so many different state and local governments, and we need someone to help us.
Well, I think this is great because I think the corporations are in bed with the government. I mean, you think of the tobacco industry, how'd they get into trouble? They were in bed with the government. Take these huge companies that need to export airplanes across the world. They come to the government and get their subsidies, Export-Import Bank. So I would say, yes, let's go after the corporations because they are part of the problem. They run this government and they come here. So I would agree with you entirely. The corporations and government, this is where the big welfare is. People criticize food stamps. I criticize the welfare state to big business interests. That's why we fight these wars, to promote all this weapon manufacturing, and so that these huge companies go over and get contracts in Bosnia and Haiti and all these countries. So I would say I agree with the gentleman entirely. I mean, we have a corporate welfare state, we have corporatism, and the sooner we go after this, the better.
And last, an email from a viewer in upstate New York. Senator Murray just mentioned that her upcoming campaign will cost approximately $5 million. Could she please give us a breakdown of that money in the following categories: individual contributions, out-of-state contributions, the 10 largest contributors, and could Ron Paul answer the same question?
I couldn't off the top of my head because I don't keep that track of it, but I can tell you the vast majority of my contributions are from within my state, from individuals. My average contribution is less than $100.
I have 14,000 people who donate to my campaigns. The average donation is $58, and these supporters are from around the country, a lot of them in Texas, of course.
Congressman Ron Paul, former Libertarian Party presidential candidate, now serving in the U.S. House of Representatives.